Specs or Development Specs Academy. Good morning and thank you for coming on today.
Good morning. Thank you for
it's December and yet to have a plethora of items still hitting the polity, as it were. You never either thought, okay, it's festive period, so we should be in that mood, but look, what it is here. But that unfortunate incident, it's what clearly dominates the headlines, and rightly so, because it raises a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, much as the Air Force did put up a statement saying, look, because several people went to town saying it was the Air Force that did it, Air Force put up a statement saying, no, that was not Air Force. Air Force had not carried out any attack whatsoever in the last 24 hours. And so people should, media should verify the stories before they claim that it was the Air Force. But Army drone, it turns out it was an error. And one wonders, how do people respond to this? Error, especially when you know that this kind of case has happened before, where there was bombing, they said it was a mistaken target, and now this.
Well, there's actually, first I'd like to commiserate with the affected families. You know, loss of human life is deeply painful. People you were playing with, talking to and doing all kinds of, all of a sudden they are no more and permanently. So I commiserate with them. And I congratulate the state governor for the prompt response, not just in acknowledging the crisis, but in saying that the state will bear the cost. Now, that's clear, responsible, and quick display of control leadership, and it's also announced investigation. Now, the part where I think we might need to be a little careful is where it concerns the army. 3 definite, incontrovertible facts must be put on the table. Number 1, the Nigerian army did not set out in that operation to kill civilians. They didn't set out to kill Nigerians. They were in their routine business of trying to maintain and sustain national security. And so, in terms of operational intention, they were looking for and shooting at bandits and terrorists. In the process, what Americans call collateral damage occurred. So whereas we acknowledge the pain, whereas we insist that it be investigated, and if there was carelessness, it should be dealt with, we should be careful about statements and reactions that would demoralize an already over-challenged Nigerian army. If you get out on the street, it's their boys that are on the street. They're not supposed to be there. They're spread too thin. You go to the southeast, you see them everywhere. The other, I think, 3-4 months ago, a plane load of soldiers was shot down in Niger State. 20, I think, died. What was the response? The state governor said, no, don't think of attacking. Go and talk with them. You see that we must not overlook the fact that it's a failure of civilian political leadership that's responsible for a national crisis from the angle of security. Because if the people in your state are employed, if there's law and order, etc., there will be nobody to radicalize. So these things will be put on the table so that we don't pretend that our crisis in the nation today is bandits. No, it's failure of political leadership. Responsible civilian political leadership is the failure that has created for the army, the police, and the other security agencies jobs that need not exist today.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, when you have this professional, very well-trained force who are supposed to be precise, precision targets, it raises questions about how they manage this scenario. And then if it was a drone, and so managing this will be huge, because if people say, but we've seen this before, we've seen it again, what's the chances that we won't see it happen another time? And so they just wonder.
Kimberly, chances are that it could happen. And if you look at the Iraqi war, if you look at all wars, particularly the international engagements of the US, where the concept of friendly fire did not come from Igbo language, it did not come from your village. Friendly fire, your intention is to take out the enemy. It turns out that the guy you opened fire on was on your side. So it is, first we must acknowledge the pain. We must say it's unacceptable. We must call for greater professional efficiency. But our reaction must be tempered by the fact that we are human and that misfires do occur and occur everywhere, even in the even the Ukrainian war.
Yeah, but,
yes.
but as civilians now, citizens, the The questions would then be, so from the previous ones that has happened, do we get any communication or any sense that they've adjusted whatever went wrong then, such that this won't occur again? Or are we going to leave it with just, or it was an error? Everybody moves on.
No. It's very painful. We shouldn't play it down. But look at the scenario. You and I are the pilots. We've gone out on a bombing operation. We have weather readings before we take off. We have clear markers of where to bomb. And midway, something happens. There are circumstances. I don't want to go into the details because two things might occur. May be mistaken for an excuse. Some might even be offended. You know, people died and they are talking about this thing. It is very painful. It is unacceptable. But let's get to the facts. For 3 or 4 things you need to acknowledge. Friendly fires do occur, even with the most sophisticated military. During the Iraqi war, the Kuwait engagement, there were places that were bombed on the mistaken assumption that they were tanks. Now, this doesn't excuse this. You remember also in the past, I think a refugee camp had been bombed in Aero, here in Nigeria. So those things are unacceptable, but we must put all of it in context. An overstretched military, a nation where there's a lot of bitterness and suffering and hunger, hapless villagers bombed to death, is bad news. Very bad news. But let's also remember that the soldiers are us. It's with our money they bought their uniform. They are people's brothers, sisters, uncles, fathers, etc. It's no pleasure for them. And their job is the only job I know where you either open fire or you're dead. So let's acknowledge.
That's what they're trained for.
That's their job. That's their job. Nobody makes apology for that. If you did, why did you join the army? But having said that, you know that on the side here, okay, there's been a lot of bombing going on through the year. This is December. And probably this is the 1st or 2nd. And every other positive thing that has occurred since January, we point into the ghetto on account of this. That's the angle I want us to look at. But whichever way you look at it, this is very unpleasant business.
Indeed,
and we should, you know, yeah.
Indeed, very unpleasant. But there's some things you said earlier that I think we should just step back a bit. You talked about failure of political leadership.
Yeah.
Saying if the people in your state are employed, insecurity would be curbed. And while I do agree with you, we all know that the states do not have the apparatus to manage insecurity, so because the security apparatus belongs to the federal government.
Yes.
So how would you tell a state governor that it's your failure to manage your space, even with all the jobs they'll tell you they are creating jobs, their people are employed, yet they still have insecurity challenges. So how do they deal with that?
Disaggregation. First of all, there was a time there was no insecurity. Not up to 5% the degree of insecurity we have today. The governors were also not in charge of security. Because their people were either mechanics, farmers, whatever. And then people were in school, government was spending on the appropriate things. So if you look at it today, and it will look, oh, they're not in charge of security. No, that was it. They've always not been in charge of security, and they had not always been in security. So what went wrong? You look at the event in Borno, how state activities led to the emergence of deviants. You look at, as the space shrank, the space you're leaving behind was being taken up. And that's what's been going on. Look, November 2021, some of us were guests of the multinational joint task force in N'Djamena, Chad. And we saw why it will be practically impossible for what's going on there to end. Because they've taken residents, they've worked out agreements with the people, they know that the joint task force cannot come more than 25 kilometers into any of the 4 affected countries. So they operate out of that range. The people have agreed, they know what they are paying. The women, we met with the women leaders who explained that, look, our sons are there, not willingly. We don't want them to be shot. The army will come here, the Air Force. No, we're not cooperating with them. These people, we know what we pay. Now, when you have that kind of situation, remember that's part of the state. Would you say there are schools there? Nothing.
So at what point does the political class not see the change in dynamics and then into change strategy as well?
Oh, that's easy to see. When you fly mostly by private jet, you know the condition of the roads. Now, tell me which of the governors does not travel by private jet? When your understanding of development is to flag off big projects in the city, particularly the state capital, how would you know what's going on? When you assign police, let's suppose this is part of Abuja, and we have a station, and 19 policemen are assigned to this entire place to protect it, and the 3 of us are wealthy people who can take about 6 or 7 of them, or 9, it reduces the number. How would you know? And when all the big men have escorts, armed, etc., so you can understand why the elite is totally disconnected with the reality it's supposed to manage. And so it has also bred a new class of young replacement generation who do not understand or see any connection between office and service. I'm your PA or SA. What's my job schedule? I carry your bag, I greet you in the morning, I don't see any file, I do nothing. And there are 2,000 of us, and I'm hoping you make me a head of parastatal. Because once you do that, I have my own SUV, I have police escort, and I spend money. The concept of income generation and development doesn't exist. The consciousness of the emerging elite and the reflexes of the serving elite and existing elite is reinforcing it.
You know, serving there is relative.
No, misuse of words. You see, I said serving and then existing, so I think let's opt for existing.
It is that spending of money that Nigerians were angry about a couple of days ago concerning COP28, Nigeria's delegation, where initially 1,411 were said to have been those from Nigeria. Then government eventually spoke up and saying, well, Nigeria's federal government-funded delegation is made up of a total of 422 persons. So they went ahead and listed it. National Council of Climate Change, 32. Federal Ministry of Environment, 34. All ministries. Now, you need to look clearly to look at what they say. All ministries. So if you see the names of these ministries, because this is 167. Presidency, 67. Office of the Vice President, 9. National Assembly, 10. Federal parastatals / agencies, 73. So you have all ministries, you still have parastatals and agencies, 73 of them. And so government seems to be saying, look, not 411.
Just 400 and something.
So, as government says.
And that's good, right?
Go and do what? Okay, let me tell you what I would have done if I was in a position of government. What ministry? The climate change people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
National Council on Climate Change, 32.
You send 2 people.
Instead of 32.
You send 2 people because it's an exchange. There's something you want to say, somebody you will say it. Yes, whether secretarial backup or whatever, somebody who could be doing something, working with you. So you go, 2 of you go, you do all the briefing, you gather all the data. We come back to that agency and have a 2-day retreat or 3, where we brief them, tell them what new things have come in that we can apply here. 30 people off. Now you look at all the other ministries.
Environment, 34.
34. This is just an opportunity for discussion, ESTA code. But the worry is the lack of a sense of shame and embarrassment in the use of public funds. So you should, okay, if you take 33 people, these will be mostly principal officers out of a ministry for how many days? You've shut it down. But that's not the issue. Let me give an example. I think sometime in the mid-2000s, Peter Obi had taken over as governor of Anambra State. And you know the World Igbo Congress is a major, it's like the ultimate event, global event in the name of Igbos. And so it was taking place in Lagos, and they brought him the list of those going. Nearly 60. He said, wait, what are they going to do? He said, no, it's a World Igbo Congress. He said, no, that's not my question. What are they going to US to do? He said, to attend World Igbo Congress. He said, I'm the one invited. He said, yes, please, go and adjust the list. They went, came back, it was still 30-something. I said, sir, see where it was. I said, I'm not saying where it was. I'm asking you why they have to go. It's World Igbo Congress. So they're going to discuss things affecting Igbos. Let one person go and come back and brief us. They didn't believe it, but that's what happened. The same thing happened with his travel list. You see, we must connect expenditure with projected, feasible, and realistic benefits. So this number, it doesn't excuse anything.
State government's response. It said, as the biggest economy and most populous country in Africa, with a substantial extractive industry and extensive vulnerability to climate change, Nigeria has a significant stake in climate action, and our active and robust participation at COP is therefore not unwarranted.
It is not unwarranted. It's important that we went. It's important that the president speaks. It's important that our position on the matter is known. It's important that we also, in fact, speak for West Africa and our country, because much of the places where you have banditry, re-desertification is taking place, etc. No question about that. We're not quarreling with whether we should have gone. If we didn't go, it would have been really bad. Who should have gone? How many should have gone? For what purpose? Now, all these people, if you say, okay, when you come back, let's see deliverables. How many of them will tell you anything? So personally, I think it was a mistake. The number is too much. The explanation that government sponsored only 400 and something still leaves unanswered the question of who paid for the rest, because you're talking about what the federal government did. The rest are not private individuals. So I think the number was too much. That's just the summary.
That 422, so say that's federal government funded.
Yes.
So let's look at another breakdown here that has about the whole 1,411. We see here a Ministry of Environment 53, National Assembly 36, NNPC 28, Ministry of Foreign Affairs 21, Ministry of Environment again 16. The first one was Federal Ministry of Environment 53. Now, Ministry of Environment here, assuming that's a state Ministry of Environment 16, Lagos State Government 14, NDDC 13. I mean, in the Niger Delta, you need to know about the environment.
Yeah.
Bank of Industry 13, Ministry of Petroleum Resources 12, Federal Capital Territory 11, NSIA 9. Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, I guess that's a state ministry. But if you go down, you see multiple times Ministry of Environment. And then you also see some private organizations there as well. All coming down to that number. Considering the size of Nigeria.
The source of that is
StatiSense. This is from StatiSense.
And the claim it was an on-site registration.
Yes. That initially, they were, I think, the ones who blew the whistle.
So one begins to ask the question, because it is believed that for the first time, the numbers of all those that attended the event were taken note of, and they were all registered. For the first time that's been. But doesn't this say a lot about our country, Nigeria, being the enormous size that we are? We need to get there, and from different angles we are pulling information. There are different meetings that happen at the COP. It's beyond a 2-day event. I mean, we've finished all the big events, but there are other sideline events happening, and you fault the size of delegation.
I do. The number is simply too much. Even if whichever way you choose to look at it, it's not about not attending, it's about how many and the value they are bringing. I think the number is too much. I think also it even presents an opportunity for some form of integration of capacities and perspectives. Take, for instance, Ministry of Environment. An event like this could provide opportunity for instance, for you to come back and convene the National Council on Environment, in which case all the states will be involved. You bring out what came from that event. Assuming, for instance, they took one person from each state, from environment, where they have, I have no problem with that. They will not be the anchor persons. So that's what I'm talking about. I believe the number is too much. I may be mistaken. And the defense of it could have been better structured also. You can't say, oh, Nigeria. No, nobody's saying Nigeria shouldn't attend. We're saying that we could have gone with fewer numbers. And now you're talking about cost, you're talking about perception of wastefulness and all of that. It's uncomfortable to me that we could do this at this time, that's all. Because in all of this, yes, there'll be side events, there'll be syndicates, etc. We have capacity to deal with that without taking nearly 2,000 people out.
There are two other items that are uncomfortable to some people who have heard it, but we'll have to go to our colleagues in Lagos. They've got questions for you.
Thank you, Chamberlain. I'd like to start from the rear. Good morning, Mr. Okay. You put up some very interesting views on the the accidental bombing and the explanation provided by the army. And Ran is on my mind, you know, from 2017 when 115 people died. Beyond failure of political leadership, let's also look at the rules of engagement of the army. Is there any explanation tenable from the army? Is this not a failure of the army's technology, and doesn't it speak to the professional capacity of the army as well? According to The Guardian this morning, this is the 10th accidental bombing by the Nigerian army in 2 years. So beyond the failure of civilian political leadership, shouldn't we begin to also look at the competence of the Nigerian army, which, you know, has been famed to be leading the charge in prosecuting, you know, wars, even on behalf of neighboring African countries in the recent past? And here we are, you know, with the Nigerian army, you know, with 10 accidental bombings, with a lot of casualty of civilian population on their hands in 2 years.
Yes, I understand the point, but I'd like to separate them for clarity. There is no connection whatsoever between civilian leadership and the bombing. So I want us to disaggregate that. I brought in the element of civilian leadership when I was talking about the fact that insecurity, first of all, and banditry cannot take place except you have unemployed people, all manner of social dislocations, in which case the people are outside the economic and social safety nets, and therefore they go into all sorts of things and radicalization. So that's a totally different thing. And I made that comment in connection with the question regarding the fact that, oh, you know, governors are not heads of security, and therefore that explains banditry. I pointed out that there was a time there was no banditry, no terrorism, and governors were still not head of security. So I thought we should disaggregate that. Now, on the question of the bombing itself, it is bad news. It's not good. It's also unacceptable for it to be so frequent. That must also be acknowledged. So, but the other point I wanted us to be sensitive to, by pointing out that this is unacceptable, is that the army itself, the Nigerian military is under a lot of pressure doing jobs it's not supposed to be doing. So it is clearly must have been a miscalculation because they didn't set out to shoot civilians. But having said that, it's important we do whatever needs to be done to ensure that this doesn't happen again. 100 and something, I mean, so many people killed and so many injured. These are human beings, fathers, mothers, children. The place is thrown into mourning. So it's not good at all, it's not acceptable, but at the same time, let's also be sensitive to the fact that the army did not set out to kill civilians. So the way I agree with you is that whatever miscalculation, logistical challenges may have led to this should be avoided, if possible, permanently in future. But we must not move from there to go and give the impression that, you know, it was deliberately intended to take out some civilians. No, I'm not sure. I'm also sure that's not the point you're making.
And, well, point taking there, I was just curious about the rules of engagement of the army. Back to the current conversation, which is COP28. And, you know, we've had cause to also look at the numbers of the delegates from other countries. Kenya has 765, Ghana 618, the United Kingdom has 697, Canada has 742, you know, and that if we look at their own delegates list, it's a lot more than what the Nigerian government claims it's sponsored in an official capacity. And the argument from the political elites, particularly from our conversation on our sister political program last night with Senator Jimo Ibrahim, is that this number is required as some form of political currency that can earn us the right to host the conference sometime in the near future, and therefore we need to sort of measure up. I wonder if you agree with this argument and if it justifies sponsoring that number of delegates to COP28.
Oh, well, let us assume that the claim is correct. There is a number of delegates you bring that earns you the right to host subsequently. If that is true, then they probably should have taken an entire local government along. What qualifies you to host FIFA is not that you send 2 million people to watch World Cup in another country, but that you have the right facilities, security, and logistical efficiency to warrant your hosting it. Now, if we also assume that this explanation is correct, then that should have been what would come out from the presidency. What we are told is that Nigeria has a stake and it would be bad if we didn't attend. Now, if somebody had come out to say, yes, Nigeria has a stake, look at the number of delegates from other countries, our own is not as outrageous. In any case, the number of delegates and the extent of participation is often a qualifier for subsequent hosting, potentially. And therefore, we know what we are doing. We are following the rules. The rules of engagement are such that the more visible you are, the more likely you are to become a major stakeholder to the extent that you could host it. If that was the explanation, they will have something else to quarrel about. Finally, on this, if Kenya has 600, UK has 700 and something, all the figures you mentioned, it still does not address the question of why they are there. The fact of their numbers is different from the justification for the numbers. They may all have done the same thing we did. So I don't have the details on that, but my point is, from the angle of administrative efficiency and effectiveness, and also in terms of measurable income outcomes, I believe fewer people should have gone. Now, if there's some other information on this matter that's not available to me, that may then explain why it is right to have the number that went. I have no terminal position on this matter other than to say that the facts available to me and common sense suggests to me that the numbers were too large. And when you look at some of the detailed breakdowns, you ask yourself why so many people would come from just one agency. Even if you're going from most of the national councils, you say, okay, National Council on Information is being hosted by Ogun State. All the state ministries of information will send representation. How many would come? If we're going to UN, but the major thing is that the optics are bad and the explanations are worse than the optics. There might be a more cogent one, and I think they should give that.
Lastly, from me, Prof, let's assume without conceding that these numbers from all the different participating countries in the world are justified, then we'll be having nothing less than about 50,000 delegates from different countries in the world participating in the climate change conference annually. And they all fly from different parts of the world to the location. And, you know, aircraft use Jet A1 fuel, and Jet A1 fuel is fossil fuel, which also emits CO2 into the atmosphere that causes global warming. So I
see your point.
Have leaders, you know, do they have their priorities right, really? Because we're talking about climate change and the adverse effects on the weather conditions in the world.
Well, I think it's a deliberately mischievous question, quite frankly. If you want to, let's suppose you want to, what do you call it? But quite objectively, and from the perspective of plain, straightforward science, there's nothing wrong with them flying there, because if you look at the degree of pollution that will have been occasioned by the Jet A1 of 50,000, they didn't each go with an aircraft. You probably have 300 or something of them in one vehicle, so it does not arise at all. It will be an unfair, indictment to suggest that, since you're about climate change and removing emissions, probably you should have trekked down to the venue. I beg your pardon. You mean Tinubu and our respected delegation will trek on top of the Atlantic just to make sure there's no pollution? I disagree, my dear sister.
Prof, interestingly, I was going to ask for something. Maybe Bukola was talking about us using camels and the rest of those things. But, I was actually going to ask you something related to that. This is the 28th edition of the COP. And from what you have seen, already one of the head of the United Nations Development Program, Achim Steiner, has started to complain about the ballooning numbers of people who attend COP every time it holds. So I was going to ask you about the impact it has made so far in the world.
On the one hand is, you know, the rising cases of global warming and the rest of it. Energy transition conversation still ongoing. The president, even in his budget speech, made an issue of it and is asking questions about the funding for these things so that Africa can take its pride of place. What's your take on the effect, the impact of these COP conversations over the years, particularly for Nigeria?
Well, beginning from the global, COP has been, if you like, opportunity for speech making at the global level about environmental issues. That's largely what it must honestly be said to be, because you look at when it began and what's been going on over the years, the frightening reality is that we have increased damage to the environment, greater evidence of climate change, more devastations, progressively, and in recent times going in leaps and bounds. The beluga whales, they have their habitat wiped out. Penguins are suffering. Polar bears are becoming endangered because the ice is melting due to global warming. Well, about 15 years ago or less, we had 10 sinking cities. Globally, cities that are confirmed to be sinking consistently and eventually sink. Lagos is one of them. The number of sinking cities has increased because the water volume is rising due to melting ice. So if all of these things are happening, all the indications or indices of climate change are worsening, the question to ask is, does COP really amount to anything beyond the speeches? And you ask also the major drivers, the Western developed nations and all of Europe, are they not the ones emitting over 80% of what's damaging the climate? Do they have things in place to control that? You have the carbon, what do you call it now? Carbon, I don't remember the exact technical name, which is supposed to ameliorate. So, and then the shipping companies, petroleum, do they still not clean the hull of their ship in the ocean? Why is it that our oceans are having more dead zones, that's sections where nothing can live? Why is so? When you look at all of that, and then you have 50,000 people going for a conference, my dear, even the Tower of Babel, we were not told that you had up to 50,000 in attendance. So it's going to generate a lot of documents, some of them on geological issues, some of them on what can be done, some of them action plans, which will not be activated because it will translate at the end of the day to the discretion and commitment of individual nations that attended. Yes, it's ballooning, and that's precisely why not much is likely to come out. And I say this with the benefit of hindsight, knowing that if you look at the indices of climate change 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and you look at it today, the question you will be asked, and which you've rightly asked, what has COP delivered and what is it likely to deliver? My take is that it is important to attend and take positions. It's important to draw attention to the challenges, particularly facing Africa in that regard. We are having serious desertification in the northern part of our country. But to expect to assume that COP itself will make any impact, it has no capacity for enforcement. But international visibility on global matters at a time like this is very important for any nation that takes itself seriously. So it's important that we go, it's important that we participate, it's important that our views are known. But if you're talking about measurable impact and income, particularly from the angle of benefit to Nigeria and Africa, I'm yet to see what that is.
You know, one of the things that the president made very, very clear concerning COP is that the globe, the world, must fund Africa's climate change agenda as much as possible so that whatever deliverables are expected of Africa would get to Africa. Do you see that happening? Do you see the world listening to Africa and funding climate change initiatives, particularly in the light of the high level of poverty in Africa?
See, it's important the president made that point. Africa is part of the world. But I hope we are not looking at it from the angle of beggars permanently carrying a plate or come and rescue us. Because sometimes these things come after observing your own interventions. Recall that when Obasanjo was president, we didn't get get forgiveness because we begged for it. There were steps the government took and convinced those who were owing that, look, we can write off this debt. These guys are becoming serious. Now, let's look here where we have desertification progressing. Much of the rainforest is turning to savanna, and the savanna is turning to pure arid desert all over the country. And I'll cite an example I'm sure I've cited on this show more than once, or at least once before. When you build a dam, what happens is that the communities and livelihoods downstream that are dependent on the river will be wiped out. Fishermen will either disappear or reduce, crab farmers will go, etc. Now, we've been building dams over the years such that the volume of water coming down from the north to the southern part of the country up to River Niger has gone down by over 68%. And what used to be part of the river is now just dry land. Some of them several meters high, used to be filled with water. Now imagine that there's a cocktail of steps and measures Nigeria is taking to deal with all of that. And it is now saying these measures we are taking need some kind of leveraging and reinforcement. And this is the kind of funding, etc. It will be something the international community will be a little embarrassed not to assist with. There's a technology that enables you plant in the desert. It retains water. China did a display of that. It's in use in many places. Imagine that what you're asking for is support to make it possible for the areas that are getting where desertification is taking place, a project. Why they will want to fund such a thing is that very likely it will also mean trade for them. So it's good the president said that. It's also, it's actually will be better also, now that he has said it, for us to be doing things here that can easily attract funding for climate change initiatives.
Which
or
raises...
to ask for funding.
Yeah.
You know, nations work with action plans. You can't just ask for funding because you think you deserve it.
Yeah.
Know what you're doing, draw money to flow into it.
Which raises another question for me, Prof, very quickly. That of engagement with the people. Just as you said, desertification is a problem in Africa. But when we raise climate change issues, global warming issues, do you think Nigerians are, or generally people in Africa, even understand the issues, even though it affects them the most? I'm asking that against the backdrop of trust quotients. I see a nexus between these conversations around COP, the Delegates controversial list, and the issues raised in Kaduna as that of trust. Arewa Consultative Forum, for instance, the Arewa Youth Consultative Forum, for instance, are raising the issue of failure of intelligence. No matter what explanation is given, as far as they are concerned, trust is a problem. The NEF is also asking for questions to be raised along that particular issue. And then COP, of course, delegates list and controversies and everything like that. How do you expect or suggest that government should converse with people long term so that they can give governments, whatever the issue that arises, some benefit of doubt in the long run, particularly in the name of national orientation?
Okay, first of all, yes, you say the Arewa Youth spoke. Several other organizations speak, and they're talking about intelligence. And I ask, is it not usually through the younger generation that intelligence is acquired because they're the most mobile? You see, this also presents an opportunity to urge some of these organizations of presumably young people to realize that press releases and the attacks on the older generation does not translate into any activity. And also look into their own processes and admit that most of them are just usually hunting for visibility and money. And they can make a speech in defense of whoever is ready to pay. Now, I'm not speaking with particular reference to the group you mentioned, but that has become the dominant pattern. Because that these organizations that ought to be platforms for leadership recruitment and leadership replacement have also been taken over by buccaneers. Now, having said that, conversation with the people, you can't converse or trust somebody you don't know. The platforms of conversation where state governments try to do that, they call town hall meetings. People like you and I will attend. After the event, we go to our houses. There's no smaller group below us that we now call together and then transmit further what government is doing. So you see that it becomes an incestuous engagement of the elite that doesn't trickle down. Sometimes they say, if you want it to trickle down, print it in all the Nigerian languages. English is there. Do Pidgin English, Hausa, Yoruba, Igbo, at least the 3 main languages. And I ask, my uncle in the village will leave what he's doing to read what you wrote about Abuja he doesn't know anything about. The disconnect is real, and it's not about Tinubu, it's not about federal government. It's the absence of the involvement of those at the lower levels. State governors, local government chairmen, ward chairmen, council chairmen, they are not visible the way they ought to be. And that's partly responsible for also the failure of intelligence. Because if you're in a locality where you know yourselves, strangers will be easily detected. But when nobody has a sense of community, no sense of responsibility, they keep quiet whatever they see.
All right, speaking about press releases, the army put up a press release this morning about that matter. And then they were saying that, yes, they did notice advancement of terrorists who were going to pose a threat to key infrastructure in the state and to civilians. And so they had to respond. And that we should also note that some of these terrorists usually embed themselves within the civilian populace so that the civilians will take the brunt of the whole matter and then have a lot of... But they said, well, yes, that one such measure, that the military, they regret the tragedy, but they will always conduct themselves in possible best of light. That's Major General Uba. Yeah, I was going to move on to another one.
No, very quickly on this. You see, war has become asymmetrical. These are soldiers who are trained to take out targets. Now, when target embeds itself in the very entity you're trying to protect, your training comes in the line of fire. And if they were advancing and you wouldn't know how much. So I think you get the context. Yeah. Asymmetrical warfare has become the norm, and it presents greater challenges.
So as we wind down, now there's supposed, I think there was IPAC or so, there's this planned process which certain civil society organizations are organizing. I think they call it Occupy INEC. They want to protest and ensure that the chairman of INEC, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, vacates his seat because of the woeful performance and bias, as the CSOs claim, which IPAC dissociated themselves from. But speaking of INEC, there was an attack on the residence of the resident electoral commissioner in Kogi State. And the images were not looking good. Of course, the police said they would look into the matter. But that appeared to be some dangerous signal concerning what may happen moving forward. What's your impression of that?
First of all, from the angle of occupying INEC office, nobody should go and occupy it.
Why? Why not?
It is not part of our social process. You know what to do. If you want the chairman to go, take whatever. But if you say occupy INEC office to send the chairman, what if I don't like the chairman of any RC? I got another group and occupy. Okay, I don't like the Chief Justice of the Federation. I go to the...
What if it's a peaceful protest?
No problem at all. But occupy INEC office, deny people access, no. Go and picket the place if you want. But don't disturb the staff. If you think the president should sack him, tell him, write a letter, display the letter. But to go and occupy and probably say we won't live on it, that's not the kind of country we want. All of us are angry about one thing or the other. If we resort to self-help, we're doomed. So no, it's not on. The fact that you're a CSO doesn't translate into superior patriotism. So let them not presume some imaginary profile that doesn't exist. This is our country, we're equal stakeholders. We can't just go and occupy where we don't like. Because, okay, you're CSOs. What if one tap as the party decide to go and occupy, what do you call it? Nigerian breweries. Yes, if you check out of Nigeria, have palm wine before you guys come. Come on. So on the, no, it's a very dangerous trend because it means, it's not new quite all right, but it's increasing where holding office and serving the public or the nation becomes increasingly dangerous. But the other controversy is holding office and performing a service. Are you always serving the nation? You're likely to be more endangered when there's perception of bias, in which case those who feel you've worked against them, not that you follow the rules, will then also become as desperate as those you worked for to take you out.
All right, well, at the time, couldn't go to the other matter. Some officials of governments in Kano State were caught repackaging palliatives.
Yeah.
And the police say that they would deal decisively with all those people.
Can I do 1 minute on that?
Less than a minute.
Less than a minute.
Fine.
It's not new. 1983, essential commodities. COVID-19, the same thing now. But it's more now because those who are supposed to service the state are the ones subverting the public powers now.
Professor Ikechukwu, Executive Director, Development Specs Academy. Thank you for coming on this morning. All right, we're back in a moment. Don't go away.